From MTN News, welcome to America Votes, Montana's race for governor.
Good evening and thanks for joining us for this MTN special report. I'm Tim McGonigal. We come to you tonight from our MTN studios in Great Falls. This is where we had planned to host a debate between Greg Gianforte and Ryan Busse, the two candidates vying to become Montana's next governor. MTN has been hosting debates for at least the past 30 years between all the major party candidates, but this year is an exception. Governor Gianforte declined our invitation. We changed our plans and instead invited the two candidates to sit down with us for interviews. We'll be sharing those conversations with you over the next hour. MTN's Jill Valley begins our coverage with a closer look at the Republican in the race for Montana governor. That's Greg Gianforte.
It's a sunny fall day at the state capitol in Helena. But that's not where we met Montana Governor Greg Gianforte.
Hey, good to see you. Thanks for coming.
Instead, we met at Olympus Arms, a gun-making company where almost all of the gun parts are manufactured in this warehouse.
This machine wasn't running the last time you were here.
Today, we got to see the Vulcan rifle, a long recoil, multi-caliber, recoilless and modular firearm.
Spring that pushes the barrel up to one side.
Still, you can do all your maintenance without any tools.
All of it the same way.
And it turns out the governor is a good shot. Olympus Arms mentioned it sometimes struggles to find qualified employees. Governor Gianforte says he's got a plan that could help through the Workplace Learning Experiences program.
What it does is it allows high school students to spend a portion of their school week in local businesses, and they get high school graduation credit.
Programs like this are near and dear to Gianforte, so we sat down with him and his wife Susan in the backyard of the Hauser Mansion, their part-time residence in Helena.
You were our congressman from 2017 to 2021, then became governor. What's the difference in those two offices for you as a leader?
Well, I so enjoyed my time in Washington. It really gave me an appreciation for the legislative process. I think it's made me a better governor because I have a lot of respect for the collaborative work that gets done to get legislation through committee, through a house. But the state is much more like a CEO job.
And just like most CEO jobs, it didn't happen overnight. Greg Gianforte grew up in Pennsylvania. He got his bachelor's degree in electrical engineering and a master's in computer science from Stevens Institute, the same school his father attended. He met his wife Susan at the donut table of a Red Cross blood drive when they both worked for Bell Labs. Susan is also an engineer, and they are a team.
So Susan, why would you say your husband's a good governor?
I think he is really good at managing people, motivating them, encouraging them, as he says, celebrating when there are successes. He just is really good about putting a team together that's very highly functioning, and the results follow with good people.
Gianforte spent summers as a kid in Red Lodge and fell in love with Montana. When he grew up, he made his way back.
In 1980, I took the train all the way across the country by myself and got off at West Glacier and hitchhiked into Kalispell to Snappy's and bought a fly rod and hitchhiked back up to Hungry Horse, Spotted Bear, and hiked all the way to Lincoln, all the way across the Bob, and that kind of sealed the deal.
He and Susan eventually raised their 4 children in Bozeman, starting 5 companies, including Right Now Technologies. He tells me he followed his friend and Montana Senator Steve Daines into the political arena.
I ran for 2 reasons. One, to create an environment where entrepreneurs can create more good-paying jobs, and secondly, to protect our way of life. And we're making great progress.
But Gianforte knows there's still more work to do, which is why he says he is running for re-election, hopeful Montanans will give him another shot.
And that's why I've signed up. If the people of Montana want me, I'll do it for another 4 years.
That was just the start of our conversation with Governor Greg Gianforte. After that interview with the governor and his wife Susan, Jill headed inside the Hauser Mansion, where she sat down with Gianforte to discuss his last 4 years in office and his top priorities should Montanans re-elect him. And Jill wasted no time getting to the topic at the forefront of many minds, rising property taxes and what to do about it.
What can you say to taxpayers who feel like maybe you got a break on your property taxes when they didn't, primarily on your Helena property and your Bozeman property? Explain that.
Well, the professionals at the Department of Revenue go out and assess property. They did a good job, and when they sent out the bills, I paid my bill. But I would agree that property taxes are too high. This is why we made it a priority, and we delivered really the largest property tax rebate in state history. But I'll be the first one to say that was a one-time fix. There's more work we need to do. This is why I put a commission together to study the problem. And I'm most excited about the homestead exemption, which will give relief to Montana residents on the rate that they pay. It also will help renters, and it will help small business. And I look forward to working with the 2025 legislative session to get that bill over the finish line.
So that high rate that we saw this time will not happen again? Is that the goal then?
Well, there's really two different views here. I mean, our approach, property taxes are complicated. And as we know, most of the property taxes goes to local expenses. There's a portion that comes to the state, but 100% of it's redistributed out. And you have to be careful because the way we've approached it with a homestead exemption, Montana residents in their primary home will pay a lower rate. Renters will get a pass-through from the landlord and will help, will stabilize farms and ranches. Unfortunately, the approach that my opponent is putting forward would actually give a break to out-of-staters by giving them a break on other taxes, and would actually raise property taxes for small businesses and farms and ranches by about 20%. And the worst part about the proposal is that it would actually defund our schools. So there's a lot of moving pieces in property tax. This is why we want to be thoughtful in how we approach property tax relief.
Two different times Ryan Busse has said the last 4 governors used the correct multiplier in determining the property tax rate, but you didn't. How do you respond to that? Is that accurate?
That is not accurate. That is not the proposal that came to me from the Department of Revenue. And it would have, if we had done that alone, this is my point, it would have defunded our schools, pulled about $90 million away from our schools. It would have increased property taxes for farms and ranches by 20%. It would have increased taxes for small business by 20%. And it would have cut the taxes for out-of-staters with second homes here. I think they need to pay their fair share. And right now, if they're not paying income tax, they should pay a higher rate on their property taxes. That's what our homestead exemption does. We've done that in other states. Many other states have done this, and I think it's a good idea for Montana as well.
Let's talk about Medicaid funding. There are some within your own party that have criticized how the Medicaid situation was handled. Thousands of people got unenrolled, and I know of one example where a man had spent a week in a mental health facility because he was suicidal, and when got out, could not get psychotherapy because he was kicked off Medicaid. Is that going to be remedied, or what happened there?
Well, we need Medicaid as a safety net. The prior administration had done the expansion, and we'll have to consider that in the 2025 session. I've been very clear. I think we need to pass an extension and make sure it's available to folks. I also believe, though, able-bodied folks who don't have dependents should be working. So I'd like to see a Medicaid expansion that includes work requirements. I think that just makes sense to most Montanans. Now, we were in a difficult situation. To do the requalification, this was a federally mandated requalification that we had to go through. It was a Herculean task for the hardworking people at DPHHS. And it could have gone smoother. But in the end, we need to make sure that people that are qualified for Medicaid have the benefit. And the federal government prohibited us from de-enrolling people who were not qualified. So we're now back to the pre-pandemic levels, which is appropriate. So that safety net continues to be available for Montanans that need it.
Housing Task Force, I know you formed that. Can you give me the bullet points and what you think that's going to accomplish? Because, you know, the talk is Montana is now not an affordable place to live.
Well, I think it's housing affordability is probably the biggest issue facing working families in Montana. This is why we formed the Housing Task Force, and I'm proud of the leadership we've had nationwide on this topic. In fact, the changes we've made have been designated the Montana Miracle. And even in your hometown of Missoula, We've seen rental prices come down double digits in the last year because of the things we've done. And the plan is really based on two facts. One is that 40% of the cost of a new home is government regulations. So we've got to reduce regulations, restrictive zoning, and ones that prohibit. In your own town of Missoula, there really was no multifamily zoning anywhere. Well, multifamily apartment buildings cost less than single-family homes on big lots. We had exclusionary zoning. We didn't allow ADUs, auxiliary dwelling units. So all these things. The second thing we learned was that we essentially have a supply problem. We had a 10% growth in the population and a 7% growth in new doorknobs. And we need increased supply. This is why we've quadrupled the number of apprenticeship slots in the building trades in Montana. We enacted our MTech program, which will pay 50% of the tuition for someone pursuing a career in the building trades, and it's working. We're seeing an increased supply of housing. I wouldn't say we're out of the woods, but we're making good progress.
It's frustrating. You look at some of the listings, though, and I know people have discovered Montana since the pandemic and thanks to Yellowstone. Some of those listings are for over $1 million, and I'm wondering who's buying those houses, and is that what's starting to drive up some of the costs that we have for regular people just to buy? Because you can't buy a home under $250,000 in Missoula, and I'm sure not Bozeman either.
Well, you're right. I mean, the show Yellowstone has brought everybody and their brother to Montana, and it's increasing demand. That's why we have to increase supply. And Jill, this is such a big problem. There is no government solution that we can buy our way out of it. There's just not enough money in the kitty to do that. We've got to unleash the private sector to increase supply and reduce government regulations so that it costs less. I was talking to one developer in Missoula. Because of the delays in permitting he encountered there locally to get a building permit, the cost of his building went up $700,000 in 18 months. And that had to be added to the price of the units he was selling. So we've got to make it easier to get permits. We've got to get rid of exclusionary zoning. And this is what we've done through the housing task force. There's more work to be done there, but I'm proud of the progress we've made.
All right, let's switch gears. Would you accept the will of the people if they vote to codify abortion rights on the ballot in November?
Yes. I think the will of the people is preeminent. I did that with marijuana. I was not a fan of recreational marijuana. The people voted for recreational marijuana, and I enacted it into law in a way that made sense. I personally am pro-life. I believe life is precious. And this is, Jill, let me say, this is a very sensitive issue that gets into very intimate relationship between women and their doctors. And I think we need to approach this with compassion and consensus. And again, I'm pro-life and I'll defend life, but the will of the people is preeminent.
So there won't be any move by the legislature or Republican leadership to try to chip away at that constitutional initiative?
Well, abortion is legal in Montana because of the Armstrong decision. And nothing I can do as governor or the legislature can do to take that away.
We did have 3 Montana laws restricting abortion that were ruled, that you signed, that were eventually ruled unconstitutional. And there were some other issues that were signed and then also ruled unconstitutional, which is interesting. How does that happen? Like, who's writing this legislation and how did it end up? You go through the process of passing something, you sign it, and then the courts say, nope, it seems like a waste.
Well, I think the bills I've signed have been pretty common sense to protect, to do things that the people of Montana wanted. For example, I signed a bill that said taxpayer dollars should not be used. I think that's a majority of Montanans agree that taxpayer dollars should not be used for abortion. I signed a bill that said a child born alive as a result of a botched abortion should be given medical care. The court overturned that. I think the extremists here are the court, not the common sense legislation that I've signed. And I think reasonable people can sit down and have a reasonable conversation, and we can find some common ground on these issues. That's what I've done as governor. My door's been open to everyone. That's why we entertain almost every night in this home, because I think bringing people together and breaking bread together and understanding where people are coming from allows us to find common ground.
So do you think the judges are the ones that are determining what is and is not unconstitutional? Do you have a problem with the judiciary?
I would say our judiciary is probably one of the most activist one in the country. They've overturned a number of bills that I think the will of the people has been thwarted. I'll give you an example. For example, I signed 4 bills for election integrity. I signed a bill for a photo ID to vote, a bill that would have required people to register to vote by 5 p.m. the day before the election. I signed a bill that gave the Secretary of State the ability to take people who are ineligible to vote off the rolls. And I signed a bill that said if you vote, you can't vote more than once in an election. Our Montana Supreme Court said all 4 of those bills were unconstitutional. I don't understand that, and that's not the will of the people.
Does the Heritage Foundation, which is a conservative think tank that people have talked a lot about because of Project 2025, does that have any voice in your administration?
I mean, I think we look at good ideas wherever we can find them. They may come from think tanks in Washington. They might come from local groups here in Montana. I think there is not a monopoly on good ideas. And I think Jordan Peterson said in his 12 Rules for Life, go into every conversation expecting to learn something. And that's the approach I've taken. And that's why I try and build consensus around issues. That's my leadership style. This is not about what Greg wants. This is about me serving the people of Montana. And on certain issues that I've campaigned on, I'm going to be unwavering on those. Like, I think less regulation generally, as long as we protect the environment and protect public safety, less regulation is better than more regulation. I think people ought to be able to keep more of what they earn. That's why I push so hard for lower taxes, and we've delivered the largest tax rebate and rate reduction in the state histories, both for property taxes, income taxes, business equipment taxes. But most of the issues that cross my desk are related to other topics. And in those cases, it's important that I hear from the stakeholders and build consensus. And if we can't build consensus, then we default to the status quo.
Let's talk about guns. We're at a firing range with a big gun. I know that's a great Montana business. They're doing good things. And you had signed a bill last year prohibiting state and local law enforcement in Montana from enforcing federal bans on firearms, ammunition, and magazines. Is that something you still stand by?
Yeah, I'm pro Second Amendment. Montana is a Second Amendment state. I made Montana a concealed carry state. It was not before. I'm proud of the fact that we have 150 firearms and ammunition manufacturers here, more per capita than any other state in the country. And this is in stark contrast to my opponent. I have an A rating from the NRA because I defend the Second Amendment. My opponent, unfortunately, even though he claims to be a gun nut, has an F rating from the NRA.
Why does that matter? Why does the NRA, to the average voter, because you either get an A or an F, nobody ever gets a C+, right? So to the typical voter, why?
Well, it's an indication of where people stand on the Second Amendment and individual freedom, the right to own and bear arms. I am an advocate. My opponent opposes it.
He bears a lot of arms, though. So what do you mean by that?
So my opponent served Joe Biden on a gun restriction board. He has been an advisor to the current Harris-Biden administration on gun restrictions. He is no friend of gun owners.
Hey, let's talk about the balanced budget. Our budget is balanced. The Montana Constitution mandates that. We have, is it $1 billion surplus? What are we going to do with that money? Why do we have so much money?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Jill. So when I came into office in 2021, I got sworn in January, I promised the people of Montana a couple of things. Related to our budget, of course I have to balance it. Every governor has to balance it. That's not always so easy, but we did it. But I also promised them we were going to fund essential services, but we were not going to grow the size of government. And the Montana budget, state budget, in 2021 and 2022, because of our conservative fiscal budget, grew less than 1% each year. The consequence of that in 2023 was we had a $2.5 billion surplus. So here's what we did with the taxpayers' money. We gave $1 billion back because it's their money in the first place. We gave it back in the form of rebates on income tax and property tax. We lowered rates. The next thing we did was we fixed what was broken. We put over $200 million into roads and bridges, both at a local level and a state level. We fixed Deer Lodge because it was long in the tooth. And we made a historic $300 million investment in behavioral health, which we're pleased just get the results this past week on the remarkable progress we've made, because we have a behavioral health crisis in the state combined with the drug epidemic. Next, we topped off our rainy day fund. We doubled the rainy day fund. We doubled the fire suppression fund. Even then we had money left over, so we paid off all of the state debt. Montana is now completely debt-free. Jill, I don't know of another state that's done that, and I certainly know our federal government has not done that. So not only do we balance the budget, we've paid off all our debt, and that puts us in a stronger financial position.
So there was a 2024 report on Montana by the National Education Association that we're pretty much dead last in starting teacher salary at around $34,000, $35,000. Some believe it's contributing to fewer qualified educators in our schools. Can we raise the teacher salary, and maybe should there be more of a conversation about what is constitutionally required of our state to provide a quality public education, rather than having so many conversations about private schools and privatizing schools?
Well, we need a strong public school system. This is why I proposed, and the legislature passed, and I signed into law, the largest increase for public education in the history of the state. In addition, we championed the TEACH Act, which increased starting teacher pay, and over 600 teachers took advantage of it the first year. But there's more we need to do. Teacher salaries are set at the local level. This is why my opponent's proposal on property tax relief is so tragic. It would defund public schools, and it's a bad idea.
All right, let's talk about, you have a family member in the LGBTQ plus community. When you talk about legislation that some might feel would marginalize that community, is it a gut punch, or how do you balance that? And I think about this when we're talking about the gender affirming care and the conversations that were going on in the last legislative session. Like, these are, Montanans as well.
I'm a dad.
Yeah.
Of course I love my kids, and nothing will change that. I love all my children. And at the end of the day, the people of Montana elected me to enact legislation that makes sense. And in the particular case, SB 99, which was, I met with parents of transgender children. I talked to the kids themselves. In the end, where I came down on that, working with the legislature, that many young people regret these surgeries later in life. And if an adult wants to make that decision, that's up to them. We're not going to discriminate against them. But I think we have an obligation to protect young children from permanently life-altering surgeries, which they cannot reverse later in life. And that's where we came out.
I don't know if the young ones are doing surgery. I think that would be more of the, is it puberty blockers? And then
which these
gives them time to think about it.
Talking to the medical profession, these puberty blockers, in certain cases surgery, have permanent lasting effects. And I just think that in chatting with the medical experts, families, these are decisions that should be left when the child is of age and they can understand the consequences.
We could dig more into that, but I want to talk more about jobs and energy, because we're looking at Stillwater Mine. They're losing 700 jobs with the palladium, Pyramid Mountain Lumber in Seeley Lake. We've got Roseburg Forest Products in Missoula. Are you concerned at all about the Signal Peak coal mine in Roundup? These are legacy jobs, and they're going away, and there's also a balance between the environment and these kind of jobs. Where are we with that, and what is the solution there?
Yeah, so I ran for office for two reasons. One is to create more good-paying jobs, recognizing that government doesn't create the jobs, they're created by the private sector. And secondly, to protect our way of life. And I'm really proud of what we've accomplished. We have more people working in Montana today than ever in the history of the state. We've had record low unemployment over an extended period. We're over 30 months of consecutive unemployment under 3.4%. That's never happened before, Jill. And we've had greater wage growth in Montana than second fastest of all the states in the country. In fact, we're the only one of two states in the country that had wage growth over the last 4 years that has exceeded inflation. And I attribute that to our less burdensome tax regime and for our regulation. It is tragic when people lose their jobs through closures, but that's the nature of the private sector. I'm thrilled. We just announced, Olympus Arms here in Helena. They're going to invest $50 million, create 60 jobs over the next few years. We just cut a ribbon on a new business in Billings last week. Vocom in Lewistown, 500 new jobs. Brickstell Defense, 350 jobs in Glendive. I was just on the phone just an hour ago with the CFO of a major corporation. They're looking at a major potential addition in another community here in the state. So we've added at the Department of Commerce, in addition to tourism promotion, business attraction, and I'm really pleased with the progress we're making.
So what would you do with Colstrip? And I know Wyoming is looking at nuclear energy projects. Is that something you'd be interested in?
Well, I think Montana's a net energy exporter. We need to continue to do that. I just cut the ribbon up at the Clearwater wind facility north of Miles City, 750 megawatts of power. I've been working very hard to get the ownership of Colstrip back into the hands of folks that actually want to operate it through its useful life. But we need to pursue an all of the above energy policy to include hydro, wind, solar, fossil fuels, and nuclear. So I'm a fan of all of it. I think we should let economics determine it. But what's really scary, Jill, is these climate activists who want to shut down fossil fuels. If we shut down Colstrip tomorrow, the light switch wouldn't do anything. According to the University of Montana, our grid would be destabilized. Electric prices would go through the roof. We can't allow that to happen. So while we continue to operate Colstrip, we need to diversify our energy portfolio, and that's the policy of our administration.
And that would help kind of offset the environmental concerns, because climate change is a concern. There are maybe some that are extreme, but like the reasonable folks will say, yes, we are having an impact and we need to figure out a way to kind of dial back on the pollution and what we're doing to our natural resources.
I would agree with that. I think we need to be pursuing innovation, not regulation. And unfortunately, the approach we've seen out of the Biden-Harris administration is regulation. The EPA has made it very difficult to operate reliable energy production here in the country. I'm looking forward to a new administration in Washington because the current one has been a train wreck.
I recall you called Busse not a legitimate candidate or a serious candidate. He said you're fascist. So these are words I've never heard before in any sort of political arena, and I've been covering politics in Montana for 30 years. First, why was Ryan Busse to you not a legitimate candidate?
Well, that's easy to answer. Every candidate for governor has released their tax returns. Brian Schweitzer did, Steve Bullock did, Mike Cooney did. I've released 17 years of my tax returns to the people because I believe in transparency. I don't know what my opponent was trying to hide by not releasing them, and I said until he does, he's not a legitimate candidate.
But he did.
Yeah.
And then you take a look at former President Trump, who was also reluctant and didn't do it. So what's the difference between?
Well, in Montana, I think we have a commitment to transparency to the people. That's what I've done. He just wasn't willing to do it until I pushed him. I'm glad he did. That allows us to have a debate, and I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, one quick thing too. First thing that you'll do if you're reelected that first day in office, number one priority.
It'll be the beginning of the legislative session. I'll do the same thing I did last legislative session. I meet with the Democrat leadership and I meet with the Republican leadership to put our cards on the table, and because I think everyone needs to have a voice at the table. I'm about building consensus and finding a path forward that's right for Montana. And Jill, I truly believe that as Montanans, regardless of party affiliation, we have more in common than separates us. We just need to be willing to listen well and understand where someone's coming from. Everyone who has a passionate voice on a topic has something relevant to say, and it should be incorporated in some way.
All right, Governor, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
There's still much more to come in our MTN special report. Up next, we introduce you to the political newcomer looking to beat Governor Gianforte. You'll meet Ryan Busse next.
From MTN News, you're watching America Votes, Montana's race for governor.
Welcome back to our MTN election special. By now, you know the name Greg Gianforte. You probably know a lot less about his opponent, Ryan Busse. Jill Valley caught up with the Democrat on his property near Kalispell.
It's a bright fall morning, just weeks away from the November election, and I'm spending time with Ryan Busse, the Democratic gubernatorial candidate for Montana.
And you are quite the chef, I'm understanding?
I love to cook. I do love to cook.
Wild birds.
Birds,
Game,
elk,
all kinds, yeah.
mushrooms.
Yeah.
There's no shortage of birds at the Busse residence, where they raise chickens, about 11 of them at last count. One of them is the star of a social media post, a fixture of his campaign.
This one right here, we call Egg Gianforte.
I met Ryan and his wife Sarah at their home in Kalispell, a quiet property at the end of a road where their 3 hunting dogs have free rein. We had this conversation in their backyard.
I have friends who are doing a lot of canvassing, and they know the name Ryan Busse, but they may not know you personally. So let me ask, who are you?
Oh man, well, we are Montanans first off. You know, this place made us better people. I spent 25 years in the firearms industry, sold lots of guns. We've raised 2 boys here in Kalispell in the Flathead Valley, and we love this place.
Ryan Busse grew up on a cattle ranch and a winter wheat farm in northwestern Kansas, graduating in a class of just 16 students. He then headed off to college, where he was the pitcher for the Bethany College Fighting Swedes. 30 years ago, he decided to move to Montana and convinced fledgling firearms company Kimber to start a sales and marketing office in Kalispell.
What was it about Montana that made you dream of moving here and starting your life?
It's Montana. You know, the place it's amazing. It's changed us in so many ways, and I think in 2 ways, the natural beauty and the sort of things we have access to, but also the egalitarian pull no rank sort of nature of this place, where we don't pull rank on each other and where we have equal opportunities, where our kids all have access to public schools, and where we all, you know, where we treat each other with kindness instead of with hate. Like, that's the Montana that I've always known. And, you know, who wouldn't want to live in that?
He's proud of the 25 years he spent in the gun industry and is unapologetic for criticizing the NRA when he felt it was using its power irresponsibly. He wrote a book about it that earned him an F rating from the gun lobby.
For me, being in the gun business was a lifelong dream. Like, it was as if I had played baseball, which I did as a kid, and then made the major leagues, right? I get to work for a gun company. I get to be around the things I love to do, hunting and fishing and being in the industry. And for quite a while, it was. And I started to see the industry take some troubling and extremist turns. And I'm still very proud to have sold lots of guns and built a gun company, but I think it's incumbent on gun owners to be responsible at the same time. And there are actions that are coming out of the firearms industry that are irresponsible.
The decision to run for governor was made by this committee of 4.
That night, it was about everybody was griping about what was going on in the U.S. and in Montana. And I said, well, what are you going to do about it? And our boys looked at each other and they said, well, we're suing the state of Montana for a clean and healthful environment. What are you doing, Mom? And I said, well, I've been standing up for schools and libraries, and I think that's what I'm going to keep doing. And so then we turned our attention to this guy, and he took a big pause and he said, I don't know, maybe I should run for governor. And that was the beginning of it.
Busse tells me there are 2 rules for this campaign: to win and to have fun. But running for office isn't easy in this polarized political landscape.
Sarah and I talked about this, and I think that, you know, we believe that we could win this race. We think it's very, very important that somebody stand up that cares about this place and fight.
Busse may be optimistic heading into November, but the polls tell another story. Most show Gianforte with a double-digit lead. After a tour of Busse's Kalispell property, Jill headed inside the family's home, where she sat down with Busse to discuss his vision for the state and what he views as the biggest differences between him and the governor.
You're campaigning on the slogan, "Get your Montana back."
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? And is it different for somebody who's been here for 30 years versus somebody who was born and raised here?
No, I think there's a basic fabric of Montana that we all depend upon, and I think Gianforte is he's pulling on the most important threads of that fabric. This place where we don't pull rank on each other, where all kids have the same opportunity, where we have access to our public lands and waters, He's yanking on every single part of that. And so when we say get our Montana back, it means a place where we have fair taxation, where a governor doesn't raise taxes on homeowners and give great big corporations a tax break. A Montana where our schools are funded, where we have the 51st worst entry-level teacher pay in the country. Puerto Rico beat us. We have 1,004 teacher vacancies. Unforgivable. We have a governor who has sued to block a public river access and is yanking on the very access to our public lands that we all depend upon. He is commercializing our wildlife. He is dismantling fish, wildlife, and parks. And so when we say get our Montana back, it's about restoring that basic fabric of equalization and egalitarianism that Montana really is founded on and that we all love so much.
The governor signed a bill last year prohibiting state and local law enforcement in Montana from enforcing federal bans on firearms, ammunitions, and magazines. Now, anytime there's an election, there's the big fear that some candidate, some politician is going to come and take away the guns, which is a very common theme in all of this. If you were elected, would you change any of that earlier legislation? And what are you telling the gun-owning community of Montana about the future of their ownership?
Well, I'm a gun owner. I've sold 3 million guns. I'm proud of owning guns, and I'm proud of the right to self-defense, and I will continue to uphold that. And I think as gun owners, we also have to be responsible. So basic things like background checks, make sure that irresponsible people don't have guns. It's important to all of us. Republican moms don't like dropping their kids off at school and worrying about their kids, and Democrat moms don't like it either. We all fear it. And I think as gun-owning citizens, it's incumbent on us to stand up when irresponsible things happen. And I think of a really pertinent example. It wasn't long ago, we had a guy in front of the school, one of the schools in Billings, marching up and down the street right across from the school with a loaded AR-15. Not okay, right? It's not okay, and gun owners ought to be the first to say, knock that off. We can't have that kind of thing scaring our kids. It's not okay to praise radicalization for that to happen. And that's the responsible thing to go do. People who care about their gun ownership, that's what they'll do to preserve their gun ownership. So I view myself as the pro-gun candidate.
Talk to me about red flag laws. I know that's been discussed in the legislature, but it didn't happen. Is that something we should look at? That's to help people in a mental health crisis be able to lock their guns up.
Yeah, red flag laws, or also called ERPO laws, extreme risk protection laws. I think it's really important, especially for women, oftentimes women in partner abuse, that when we have people in peril and threatened, people who are dangerous to themselves or to their partners, to their wives, to their girlfriends. It often is a male threatening their wife or girlfriend. I think it's really important that we have good, responsible legislation to keep those people alive. We need, of course, we need legal means to make sure that it's not abused. But look, I want to help people protect themselves against irresponsible and dangerous actions. And I don't think any gun owner really thinks it's okay to have somebody who is threatening to harm themselves or others have easy access to guns.
You don't think Republicans might say, okay, that's the first step in infringing on my rights?
I think the first step on infringing on our rights is not standing up for responsibility. As a gun owner, I want to make sure that I keep my gun owning rights, and everybody too. And I think we have to care about other citizens in our communities. And so I'm not proposing any new laws. I'm not proposing taking anybody's guns. I'm just proposing that we be responsible, and that's what my book's about. That's what my life has been about.
All right, so now we're going to dive into property taxes. I know you want to lower residential property taxes. How would you do that? And then I know because that's the funding mechanism for local governments, how would they then make up that money?
Yeah, so important to note here, the previous 4 governors, 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans, so Roscoe and Martz, 2 Republicans, Schweitzer and Bullock, 2 Democrats, were faced with a very similar situation to what we just encountered. Residential home values went up. That means that tax rates were getting ready to be jacked up. The governors show up, just like Governor Gianforte did before the legislative session, and each one of these governors is given a memo. And the memo says, we have the one that Gianforte received, and there's a spreadsheet on it that says, Governor, if you don't lower the state property tax rate, the multiplier, then all of these homeowners are going to get walloped with this big tax increase. Well, the previous 4 governors, they look at this memo and they say, no, I'm not doing that. We want to make sure that homeowners don't get their property taxes jacked up. So 4 governors did that. Martz and Roscoe, Bullock and Schweitzer. Gianforte does exactly the opposite. Not only does he allow the property taxes to be jacked up, he puts it in his budget. And then he tells the legislature to pass his budget with the increased taxation in it. The state didn't need that money. We had a $2.5 billion surplus. Billion with a B. We didn't need extra money. When he did that, he gives big tax breaks to Northwestern Energy, pipeline companies, telecommunications companies, and by the way, somehow everybody's property taxes went up except for his. His home in Helena went down 7%, 6.91%. The surrounding 75 homes all went up. How did that happen? We still don't have an answer to that.
Let me just ask, did yours go up and was it equal to your neighbors then?
Our taxes did go up. I don't remember exactly how much, but ours went up about like everybody else's here in the neighborhood, yeah.
I'm going to ask this, sales tax, would that help with some of our financial problems with the property taxes?
Yeah, I'm in favor of local option sales taxes. Whitefish has one just north of here. I think communities should be able to allowed to capture some of the tourist income. I want to be very specific though. I'm not in favor of any kind of sales tax that's regressive. So if it makes it harder on working people to buy groceries or makes everyday life of Montana citizens more expensive, not in favor of it. And the reason I'm against a statewide sales tax is for that reason exactly. The proposals have been that it would make it harder and more expensive on working people in this state. So working people pay a higher percentage of their income in taxes than wealthy people do. Greg Gianforte is a wealthy person. He long advocated for a statewide sales tax for many, many years. I'm against that because I want to make it easier on working people, not harder.
So the governor had a housing task force to take a look at the rising cost of housing, which is ridiculous in Montana, plus the inventory is pretty low. Yeah. Do you have a plan to help more Montanans be able to afford their homes?
Yeah, a few things. First off, this property tax thing has made it much more difficult on homeowners. It's raised rent on everybody because no rental home qualified for any kind of rebate. There was a bunch of red tape rebates that Gianforte did. No rental home qualified for that. So if your rent went up in the last couple of years, you can thank property taxes for that. Also, we have low income tax credits that have been established from previous administrations, bipartisan majorities, and we're not funding them, we're not using them. We should use that state program that's already in place. And we have a Department of Labor that Gianforte is using as some culture war cudgel. Why we're not using a Department of Labor to help build up and establish good working folks, let's say union working folks, electricians, carpenters, all of these people that can help build more housing. Why aren't we using our state agency and programs for that? Those are just three places where I'd start. We had an event in Whitefish, and there was a guy there, his name was Kurt, he's 68 years old, and he told us this story about having to go to work, back to work at 68, because he couldn't afford his property taxes. They had almost doubled. And something he said really specifically to me that will stick with me forever. He said, you know, Montana has always been a beautiful place to live, but the people who made it beautiful can't afford to live here anymore. People are worried about that. Folks on fixed incomes who have had their homes paid off for 10 or 15 years, they worked their whole lives to do it, and all of a sudden they get a $3,000 tax increase. They can't afford that. We are forcing people out of their homes. It didn't have to happen. We had a $2.5 billion surplus, billion with a B. And we raise everybody's property taxes? Why? Why? It didn't have to happen. And again, the previous four governors didn't raise taxes. This one did.
So you become governor, you're going to fix the multiplier?
Absolutely. It's an easy thing. It's one number in the state code. It's actually a couple because we want to make sure we roll back that there's an increase on small business too. So we want to make sure we roll that back. But the multiplier on residential homes is 1.35. The governor was told, it's in the memo. You can see it's from, I believe, November of 2023, and it says, roll back the multiplier to 0.94 or everybody's going to get a property tax increase. He left it alone. He raised everybody's taxes.
All right, let's move on to the environment. Your sons were plaintiffs in the Held lawsuit, and for those who don't know what that is, that's where Montana youth sued to demand a clean and healthful environment as required in the state constitution in our state, and they won. We know eastern Montana specifically really relies on the energy industry. There's mining and coal. We have the Stillwater mine that's laying off 700 people. Yeah. A couple of mills in Missoula have just closed. Yeah. How are you going to balance the economy with the environment when it comes to this? Because that's frightening to be a miner, yeah, and suddenly you're out of work.
The Stillwater thing is terrible, and I can tell you that mining company and the way they work with the community, really a shining example of a really responsible mining company and responsible mining operation. I'm also proud of the kids for standing up for their constitutional rights, and the Held decision will have no impact on the mining industry and the Stillwater situation. That's Russians have dumped palladium onto the world market, and that's costing those great folks their jobs. We need to do what we can. Senator Tester, by the way, is sponsoring a bill to outlaw Russian palladium, and so I would like to see us do that. As far as the energy industry in eastern Montana, there are things changing that are outside of our control. It's much like gravity. It's going to pull on Montana whether we want it to or not. And have been a big advocate for small-scale nuclear being put into Colstrip. We already have, and working people ought to be at the center of that. Working people have electrified this country. They've played a huge part in Colstrip. And I love the idea of small-scale nuclear plugging into all that infrastructure that we have. We have all the power lines there. We have the good, hardworking folks that are there. Wyoming is already working on small-scale nuclear. And I think our energy infrastructure is going to change, but that doesn't mean working people or Eastern Montana won't be at the center of it. We just need to have a governor who believes in being responsible and looking towards the future instead of looking towards the past.
And I bring up Held just because your children were in it and you obviously care about the environment.
Yeah.
So I think, people who live in a place where energy and mining and that's important to them might think, oh no, you're the candidate who's going to try to take all that away in favor of growing more trees.
No, look, all Montanans care about their environment. Almost everybody loves to hunt or fish or hike or float or swim, do all the stuff that we love as Montanans. And our Constitution provides us a guarantee to a clean and healthful environment. And I think we ought to have a governor who embraces science, not dismisses it. He urged and passed legislation that prohibited state regulating agencies from even considering science, even doing the right thing, even moving towards the future, like small-scale nuclear. And we need a governor who leads instead of does that sort of irresponsible action.
All right, let's move on to CI 128. It's on the ballot. If
Yeah.
passed, it would put in the Montana Constitution a woman's right to an abortion.
Yeah.
How do you intend to vote on that?
I'm voting yes, and very proudly so. And my running mate, Rafe Grable, is the attorney who helped craft that initiative, and he fought very hard despite some egregious unconstitutional actions from the Secretary of State and the Attorney General to get it on the ballot. And I'm very proud that it's on the ballot. We have a governor who has signed 5 restrictive abortion bills and said he promises to sign more. He said his proudest achievement was signing Senate Bill 154. Senate Bill 154 would strip the right to privacy from our Montana Constitution. That means women in this state, all people in fact, would not have bodily autonomy. You would not have the freedom over your own body. There is nothing more anti-freedom than that. You have a governor who says you don't have your right to privacy. That's wrong. I-128 would enshrine the right to an abortion in our Constitution and save our right to privacy, and I'm for it.
Let's say 128 fails, but you do become governor. How are you going to protect women's rights? How do you fight for that?
I'm going to veto every single irresponsible anti-abortion bill and bill to attack women's right to privacy. Gianforte signs everything that comes across his desk. We will veto everything. And we will fight, Rafe and I will fight to enshrine the right to privacy in our Constitution. Gianforte and a bunch of radicalized Republicans want to rip the right to privacy apart. We're very much against that.
Montana's Constitution is pretty stout in its right to privacy.
Man, our Montana Constitution, for people watching this, if you've not read the preamble to our Constitution, and frankly just read the whole document, it provides us with some unbelievable enlightened rights. The right to know what our government's doing. These were 100 common citizens that came together in 1972. The only requirement was that they could not be a sitting politician. They set themselves alphabetically, and they produced one of the most wonderful governing documents in the history of the nation, maybe in the history of the world. So we have the right to know. We have the right to an equal public education. We have the right to a clean and healthful environment. And we have the right to privacy. People in Montana are afforded the right over their own bodies. I think it's a low bar for a governor to say, I'm for the right to privacy and for people to have the freedom over their own bodies, but I will step over that bar, and Gianforte refuses to.
Let's go to Medicaid. The redetermination process led to healthcare worker layoffs across the state. Over 100,000 Montanans were.
136,000.
Yeah, there you go. Are you reading my notes here?
Yeah.
Were kicked off Medicaid. Nursing homes have had to close. They talk about it a lot in the legislature. Nothing ever happens. Some people say, the legislature should have done more. Likely it's going to come up again in January. What are your plans for this?
So 2 things on Medicaid. Number one, Gianforte did kick 136,000 Montanans off of their medical coverage. For the most part, there were some renewal that needed to be checked on, but he was egregiously and morally wrong in the way that he kicked these folks off. Many of them are working people. Many of them are permanently eligible. They're in homes. We as Montanans have always been a place that helped each other. We didn't hate each other. And for him to kick these people off, to hurt them. I spoke to the executives at Billings, at the Billings Hospital, and that day, a guy had come in who had been kicked off Medicaid by Gianforte, so he couldn't afford his heart medication. And then 2 weeks later, while I was there, he came in, had a massive heart attack, and was in the ICU. And all of us are paying for that. Medicaid is not a those people problem, it's all of us. When we kick those folks off Medicaid, those folks who deserve to have coverage, we cost that man his heart meds, then he's in the ICU. We have to bear that expense as a society, and it's morally wrong what we did to him. In 2025, Medicaid expansion again is up for renewal. There are lots of folks in the Republican Party who say they won't renew it. Greg Gianforte refuses to say what he would do, which means he will not renew it either. And if you want to see a bunch of folks who are worried about what will happen to the state, go talk to healthcare executives. A lot of them Republicans. They tell me if Medicaid is not expanded again, mental health care coverage will go away. Substance abuse programs will go away. Ambulance services will go away. In eastern Montana, where folks travel 70 or 80 miles for health care coverage, it'll be more like 150 or 250 miles. Rest homes will continue to close down. Medicaid expansion has been immeasurably good for this state. It's a 90-10 federal split. The federal government pays 90% of the cost, we pay 10%. And it has led to a healthier population, a more vibrant population. It's a pro-business thing to do. So yeah, I'm for Medicaid expansion, and I would fight hard to get it done. The last governor who did it was Governor Steve Bullock. He was a Democrat working with a Republican legislature, and he called upon good, decent Republicans to do a good, decent thing, and along with Democrats, they got something really good done for Montana. I look forward to doing that again and working with good, decent Republicans who know it's the right thing to do.
So last year, the governor signed a $1 billion Republican tax rebate, tax cut package into law, calling it the largest tax cut in Montana history. Do you think that was productive? Do you think if you're elected, you would maintain that or roll it back? Or how would you handle the cuts that were made?
Well, first off, I've already pledged we're not going to have any opt-in rebates, and we're not going to need a property tax rebate because we're going to roll everybody's property taxes back. A lot of people may have got a one-time or a two-time property tax rebate, but you had to opt in for it, meaning you had to find your geocode, you had to find what your last year's taxes were, you had to go apply for it. Gianforte can send you 3 notices, so he has your address, he knows you paid taxes. Why is he making you opt in for this rebate? 66,000 people did not get their rebates. Why? They may have not known what their geocode was. They didn't have time to go apply. Why didn't Gianforte just send them the money? It's their money. So yeah, I think the rebate was, I appreciate him sending everybody's money back to them. It's their money, but we shouldn't have had to do that. He shouldn't have raised everybody's property taxes in the first place.
So let's talk about teacher pay. You talked about it a little bit earlier. We're last, pretty much. And the issue makes a little bit of noise every time the legislature convenes, but nothing is ever done about it in the end. Our state constitution requires us to provide a quality education.
Yep.
I mean, literally, the state constitution says, since
We're falling down to our kids.
Since it's not happening, should the state be sued? What do we do to fix this problem?
We are definitely falling down, and we just had, Missoula just laid off 72, 75 teachers. Helena laid off 51. So many of the schools across the state have gone to 4-day weeks. We are falling down on our promise to our kids. I have a kid, Lander, who I'm very proud of, made it through the COVID years. It was difficult, and he graduated largely because he had a vibrant arts and music program in Flathead High here, and yet music and arts programs across the state are being threatened. It's not a quality public education if we don't provide our kids also access to arts and music. I think we have to have a governor who values public education, and I think public education is the backbone of our democracy. This guy detests public education. How do I know? Because every time he gets a chance, he proposes some privatization scheme, or he gives away his money to organizations that advocate for the privatization of our education. He wants to make money on it. I don't. I want to fulfill the promise to our kids. I want our teachers to be paid. I want to bring people together who are dedicated to public education. And we have an incredible problem coming down the tracks on almost every single one of our school districts, these big budget shortfalls. I just want people to know that that property tax, the increased property tax they paid, that increase did not go to the schools. It went to the general fund. It's sitting there for Gianforte to give away in some sort of tax scheme, maybe to big corporations again. We need a governor who cares about public education, and I promise you I do. Rafe and I running as 2 people whose action and rhetoric will match. If we say we care about this, we will fight for it and we will do it. We are proud products of public school. Our kids are public school kids. Rafe's wife is a teacher. this courses through our veins, and it's something we owe our kids.
So I've covered Montana politics for more than 30 years, and usually Democrats are pretty quiet. They don't usually use the word fascism in their campaign, but you did when describing Governor Gianforte's leadership. Yeah. That's a big word. Why go there? Why say that word?
Look, when you have somebody who wants to roll back voting rights, who wants to make it harder on women, who wants to take freedom away from people, who takes Native folks, like we just discussed, off of boards and commissions, who says that same-day voter registration is wrong. These are things that are not in keeping with the Montana that I know. They're anti-freedom. Yeah, I say things plainly. Yes, our social media is loud and proud. I'm not polished. I don't have a teleprompter to tell me exactly what to say all the time. I believe in these things. I say them like I mean them, because I do mean them. And it's wrong to attack the freedoms of Montanans the way he has. I don't think it's in any way keeping with the Montana that I know and love and has made me and just about everybody I know a better person. I'm not going to shy away from saying it like it is.
So why did you choose Rafe Graybill, and what would his role be if he is the lieutenant governor?
Rafe Graybill grew up, he's my running mate. He will be our lieutenant governor when we win. He's a public school kid that grew up in Great Falls. He's fifth generation Montanan. He has stood up for our constitutional rights. He has sued this governor and this attorney general 19 times over unconstitutional actions, and he has won 19 times. Rafe should not have to be there doing this. For decades, there was hardly ever a constitutional challenge that came before the courts here. Why? Because you didn't have a governor doing blatantly unconstitutional things. Now we have Rafe here, and I'm glad that he is here. He's an accomplished attorney with a beautiful young Montana family. His first little girl just became a public school student in Helena. Very proud to have him on. But when Rafe comes on board, we're going to make sure that we strengthen people's freedoms in the Montana Constitution, because it's under attack right now.
What would the first thing be? What was the first thing you would do if you win the governor's chair?
Well, yeah, one of the first things we're going to do is call for the property taxes to be rolled back. It requires the governor to lead, and then it requires him to bring in legislators who want to fix this, because they have to pass his proposed budget. So we're going to make sure that we roll back these property taxes to the rates that don't involve this egregious jacking up of everybody's taxes. That's the first thing we're going to do. And then we're going to go to work on public education and public lands.
Will you be able to get anything accomplished if you're a Democrat in the gubernatorial chair and you've got GOP-controlled House?
Look, if you're a Montanan who values limited government, and a lot of people do, I'm one of those. I don't want overarching, egregious government. I want good, effective government. Some of the best things in Montana have come when you have split government, right? You have a Democratic governor, you have a Republican legislature. Why? Because that requires that the best ideas rise to the top, because they know there's a potential veto sitting in the governor's chair. When you have a governor and some dangerous radicals who work together and just pass everything, that's a lobbyist dream. We should want a governor to hold our legislature accountable, and vice versa. And so I think of, again, back to what Steve Bullock did with Medicaid expansion, a Democratic governor who worked with lots of Republicans to do something really good for the state. I think there's a rich tradition of divided government, and I look forward to the day in January when we start it again.
Mr. Busse, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
We did not edit any of the responses in those sit-down interviews that you just heard, but there were several more questions we didn't have time to get into tonight's broadcast. And if you'd like to listen to those full, unedited interviews in their entirety, you can find that right now on our MTN websites.